Welcome inside episode 593 of the Locked On Senators podcast. I'm your host, Brandon Pillar, up in the beautiful Blue Mountains. Ross Levitan still away on vacation somewhere in Croatia these days, but he will be joining me in our interview with the Athletic's Scott Wheeler. We went about 40 minutes with Scott Wheeler, so it's a great chat with him. We talk about Jake Sanderson, Owen Beck, Ty Nelson, Joakim Kemell, some goalies even. So definitely stick around for that chat. And Nick Paul, he does it all, including getting a big new contract with the Tampa Bay Lightning. And the Ottawa Senators finally make some moves in their front office with two newly named assistant general managers. We got to let you know, though, that this show is brought to you by BetOnline.net. BetOnline.net has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. And now the show starts. Here we go.
Locked On Senators, your daily podcast on the Ottawa Senators. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Today is Monday, July 4th. Happy 4th of July to all our American listeners and viewers out there. And thank you for making the Locked On Senators podcast your first listen or watch of the day. You can get us on any podcast app, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. And we're also on YouTube. So if you want to support the show, guys, please give us a quick thumbs up, quick like, subscribe. Be a friend, tell a friend about the Locked On Senators YouTube page. And we are almost at 15,000 views for our mock draft video. If you haven't checked that out yet, you gotta check it out. It's a 4-hour long podcast where we have lots of guests on making their picks. We do about 5 picks each guest, and one of those guests, Scott Wheeler, our interview for today. And so we go about 40 minutes with Scott in today's episode. So definitely stick around for that chat. But before we get to our interview, some big news around the league. And Sens fans, we all still love Nick Paul. He was close to hoisting the Stanley Cup. So close. It would have been great to see a former Senator like him get it, even though he was only so shortly removed from the Ottawa Senators. A lot of people, myself included, were still cheering for the guy. And he's one of those players that the Ottawa Senators, as the trade deadline started creeping up, they offered him a contract extension. Just a little bit over $10 million for 4 years was the rumored contract offer. I think it was about 2.6 per year for 4 years. And Nick Paul said, "Hey, that's a nice offer, but I believe I'm worth more." And the Ottawa Senators said, "Okay, we're going to move on." They traded for Mathieu Joseph and a 4th-round pick in exchange for Nick Paul to the Lightning. And now Nick Paul gets a massive deal, 7-year deal, with an AAV of $3.125 million. So a little over $500,000 more per year than what the Ottawa Senators offered. Now, when you look at, okay, what does that money do in Tampa Bay, a tax-friendly state like Florida, versus how far it'll take you in Ottawa, it definitely makes a big difference. Getting to live in Tampa Bay year-round, not bad. And a team that's been to 3 consecutive Stanley Cup finals, winning back-to-back before losing this year ultimately to the Colorado Avalanche. It's not a bad change around for Nick Paul. So what I want to know is, if the Ottawa Senators had offered Nick Paul a similar contract, so let's say 7-year deal worth 3.2 AAV, would that have been something that Sens fans would have been interested in? Leave your comment below on our YouTube video, or let us know at Sens Central on Twitter. Personally, for me, I think it's unfortunate that the Ottawa Senators weren't able to hold on to Nick Paul, but getting Mathieu Joseph and a 4th-round pick in return was a pretty good exchange for the Ottawa Senators. And I'm not so sure they would have been able to work out a deal like this anyways. It seemed like the longest the Sens were willing to go was 4 years, and they weren't going to go above $3 million, I don't think. So it probably wouldn't have happened. And when you start looking at the details of Nick Paul's contract in Tampa Bay, for the first 4 years, there's a no trade clause. Sens don't really hand out no trade clauses. And then for the remaining years, there's a no move, no trade clause attached to that as well. And then the signing bonuses. Nick Paul did very well with the signing bonuses in this contract. I mean, he's already gotten $3.4 million in signing bonuses. So, and then there's a $2 million signing bonus, no signing bonus for 2024 to 2026, but then 3 more years of $1 million signing bonuses happening each year. So probably not going to get anywhere close to that kind of contract, especially 7 years with no trade clauses and bonuses attached to it. That is not the Senators' way of doing business. So I don't think it would have worked out. And I think both parties are better that they've each moved on and they've each kind of found new homes. Mathieu Joseph in Ottawa and Nick Paul in Tampa Bay. And Tampa Bay had to move Ryan McDonough's contract just to afford Nick Paul, and they got a pretty low return. Just Philippe Myers and Nodak, former Nodak player Grant Mismatch, was a part of that deal as well. So that's a very interesting move for Tampa. But when you're up against the cap like that, you got to make tough decisions. I don't think the players were too stoked about that. But Ryan McDonough, he's going to look like an absolute stud on the back end of the Nashville Predators. So that's a good move for the Predators, if you ask me. And Tampa, not much they could really do there, especially when they're looking to extend Nick Paul in a long-term deal like this. So, guys, like I mentioned, please leave a comment below if you think that the deal that Nick Paul got with the Tampa Bay Lightning, if the Senators were to do something similar to that. Now, I know they wouldn't have done the no move clauses, the signing bonuses, etc. But if it was something similar, would that have been something you're interested in? Or are you happy they parted ways and you're stoked about Mathieu Joseph, who still needs a contract, an RFA, another RFA in the Ottawa Senators organization that is yet to be extended or re-signed. So Pierre Dorion, he's going to have to get things going here. That's for sure if he wants this to be a successful summer. And remember, he said in May, don't judge this team after the trade deadline. Don't judge it after the draft. You can make your judgments of how this roster looks in September when training camp rolls around. So we're going to give Pierre Dorion a little bit more time here, but he's got to get some more things other than just signing Dylan Gambrell to a 1-year extension done on his list for us to feel good about that. But if you want to feel good about your sports gambling, then you have to go to the number one trusted online sportsbook of the Locked On Podcast Network, and that's betonline.net. Guys, hockey may be over, basketball may be over, but there's still lots of action going on. And from all the latest odds, totals, player performance props, to where the next fired coach is going to land, if you're doing any sports betting, betonline.net is your number one spot. It remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, news, and updates this season. It's not just hockey, guys. Even though we're a hockey podcast, BetOnline does more. They do baseball, golf, boxing, UFC, and football is coming around the corner here, so get ready for that. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. It's betonline.net, where the game starts. All right, and like I mentioned off the top of the show, we do have a great interview with Scott Wheeler coming up here, so I'm going to lead us into that. It starts off with a little bit of Jake Sanderson revisiting, as Scott does let us know that was one of the players that he missed on, and Sens fans were very quick and very loud to let Scott know that they did not agree with his evaluation of where Jake Sanderson ranked in his draft rankings and what his future will look like. And Scott Wheeler is a great guy, and we knew if he came on the show, we could talk about it with him, and he wanted to clear the air that, look, hey, you're not always going to be right about every prospect, and that's fair. That happens. There's a lot of guys that even Ross and I, in our short time of profiling prospects and ranking them and seeing where we think they'll project, we've been wrong a lot as well. So, and when you're in the public eye like Scott Wheeler is, it gets magnified a little bit. So, Sens fans, this is definitely a time to let go of the Jake Sanderson anger you had towards Scott Wheeler, because he fully reflects on maybe he could have done things a little bit differently in his evaluation. And that's fine. Everyone's growing as the scouting and each year drafts change and you get more information on prospects. So definitely stick around for that part of the chat. We get into who he likes at number 7 overall. If the Sens do indeed decide to keep that pick, Joakim Kemell is a guy he really focuses in on, or Mathieu Savoie is another option that Wheeler liked. He talks about Ross's guy, Owen Beck. He talks about my guy, Ty Nelson, and we're a hashtag goalie friendly show. We didn't get to profile a single goalie in our top 64 ranks. It was wild that didn't happen. So we asked Scott Wheeler all about the goalies in this draft. So without further ado, guys, let's get to our interview with the Athletics' Scott Wheeler.
All right, we now welcome on a very, very special guest back to Locked On Senators, his first appearance in the YouTube era. Wow, we'll get into why that is. We got some apologies to give our next guest. He's a national reporter and draft analyst with The Athletic. It's Scott Wheeler. Scott, I feel like the WWE heel music should be playing right now, but we appreciate you coming back on the show.
Yeah, am I behind enemy lines at this point? Where are we at on Jake Sanderson and all of that?
I think we're feeling good because, you know, we've been doing this to obviously a lesser extent than you, but I think we've been wrong about 85% more than we've been right. So that to say, it's a job where everything changes in an instant. I remember when Brad Lambert was going to be the first overall pick this year, and now we're talking whether or not he's going to be a first round pick, let alone first overall. So I see now, just from an outsider's view in, things can change in an instant. And you saw that even with Jake Sanderson, because obviously that's the one we like to poke at you. He came climbing up the rankings after hockey ended, coming into the pandemic. So it just shows you. So I think we're on a good track. We still might have some beef with you about the 2021 draft. We'll let that simmer a little bit further. I know that your famous quote was, "I'd be shocked if they get an NHLer out of day 2. We like what we've seen from Zach Ostapchuk. I think otherwise you've got a pretty solid footing to stand on still. But I think that, as you said, water under the bridge will pull you up onto the raft, and your content, I mean, you pump out more than anybody else, and it's so in-depth. So we appreciate you coming on because, as you know, and as we're hoping, this might be the last time the Sens are drafting in the top 10, if they even keep the pick, as we're hoping this rebuild goes in the next step. But what's your overall impression on this draft as well?
Well, first of all, just on Jake Sanderson,
yes, please.
Let's get it in audio form, just like we've got it in written form now. That was a miss for me. I was too low on him. I had him in the teens on my board. I felt that he belonged in the top 10 conversation, but I didn't like him in the top 5 conversation. And 2 or 3 years later now, he belongs. So
let's put you on the spot. Where is he right now if you do a redraft? And it's hard because he hasn't played an NHL game yet, but neither have a lot of the guys in that mix.
Still probably not my pick there. If I were to reorder it, he's still maybe a couple of spots lower than that, but he's in the 6, 7, 8 for sure. And maybe he belongs at 5 for me. I'd have to really sit down and mine through it and think about it, but he's definitely not 15, 16, 18 where I kind of had him down the stretch. So he's much closer to where they picked him than where I ultimately landed on him. And that's a testament to a job well done by the Sens scout. They're going to have no regrets about that pick whatsoever at this point. He, health permitting with his hand and everything, he's going to be a stud maybe as early as next year. So
did you see the cast?
I mean, he looks like the real deal.
It's crazy.
Yeah, my understanding is that the cast that he was wearing in that picture that went viral of him, my understanding is that he wasn't actually wearing that as his like everyday cast.
It was like a water cast.
Yes, yeah. Exactly. So
floaties.
Not to be alarmed. His hand wasn't completely mangled. Not to be alarmed. No, he'll be fine. And yeah, I mean, I think he even if he doesn't become a true sort of number 1, he's going to be a top pairing, minute eating guy. And I thought when they picked him that he was going to be closer to a sort of number 3, number 4 quality guy rather than a true sort of star echelon guy. So credit to him and his development since then, and credit to what they saw in him. He was a young player in that draft. He was great in the second half and became the star of that team, and obviously was a star that year, specifically at the All-American Top Prospects game that BioSteel hosts down there. And I just didn't catch up. I didn't catch up fast enough and move him up fast enough. And that's been a problem with a couple of players that I've missed on. Moritz Seider, same boat. I grew to really like Moritz late in that year, but I didn't give his DEL playoffs and his world championships that year enough credit. And as a result, he was another guy who was kind of in the teens, 20s on my final list, and who I was critical of when Detroit picked him. And now, I mean, we know who Moritz Seider is. That miss for me was probably even bigger than the Jake Sanderson one. So it's those two, though, for sure. Those two are I've been doing this for 9 years now, and those two are the ones I've got to live with.
Yeah, and I mean, it happens, right? Like when you do this for so long, you're gonna hit some home runs and you're gonna have some misses too. So we can move past that and keep it in the past. And hey, Ross and I, we always say we love getting mad at lists. So even though we didn't agree with you, we had a lot of great content getting mad at your list there.
Yeah,
so we appreciate that.
That's a piece of what this is about too. I'm not here to shock jock anyone, but certainly I'm here to stand firm on what I believe and trust myself and the time that I put in. And I think going about it that way is better than some of the hive mind that can develop in the public sphere in particular. I think people would be stunned to see how different NHL clubs' lists are from the ones that exist in public, right? So it's a very difficult thing. I mean, there's that cliche about imperfect science, but it's a difficult thing, especially in hockey where the game is so fluid. I mean, I write about this all the time, but in baseball, how hard a pitcher throws the ball is the X's and O's, right? And the X's and O's of basketball nowadays is wingspan, and what wingspan means for a player's ability to defend and rebound and defend multiple positions as basketball changes. And 40-yard dashes really do matter in football. In hockey, these things like the combine, and it's just you can't boil it down that simply in hockey. So it makes scouting, I would argue, a much more difficult job. So it's complicated. Anyways, the 2022 class.
All right.
My overall perspective is that I'm higher on it now than I was at the start of the year. I think that's been a natural process for a lot of scouts, a lot of folks I talked to. There was just a developing and a sort of fondness that grew for this draft class. And the big reason for that is that so many of these kids didn't play last year or played half seasons. And it just took people a little bit longer this year to build out their list, get comfortable with the draft. And then suddenly everybody went from feeling like it was maybe a weaker draft. And many still do feel like that. But people, I think, started to appreciate the depth in this group more. I think there is a consensus that the top end of this draft, this is not maybe the year to be drafting first, second, third overall kind of thing. It's just not a great group at the very top, but there is real depth. And my list, I think that was reflected. My list typically drops off at 10 and then early 20s. Those are what a typical scale looks like in a draft class. And this year it was kind of 11, 12, and then late 20s. Like I had 28 players on my list, which broken down in the tiers that I use. I had 28 players that I was pretty excited about in this group, and that's 6 or 7 more than usual. So that, I think, speaks even deeper down. My list really dropped off at 90. Typically, it drops off at 80. So you've got 10 players further down that I start to like. So not a great draft. Obviously, there's no McDavid, there's no Bedard. This is not 2015. This is not what next year's draft is going to be. 2023 is going to be special. But I'd say it's about average. I'm not disappointed or upset with this group of players by any stretch either.
Yeah, and that seems to be the consensus by most people, is there's not those generational talents, but there's a lot of good talent spread throughout the draft. And you touched on some of the guys in the OHL specifically that now this was their rookie season when they should have had 2 seasons under their belt. Mm-hmm. Just how much does that affect these prospects? Like, this must be so weird for scouts, reporters, people that covered the draft to have to look at and appreciate, hey, these guys missed a full season of development, over 60 games that they just didn't play. For the first time in probably a lot of these prospects' lives, they went a full year without playing hockey. Like, just how much did that impact OHL guys specifically?
It was difficult. Particularly the OHL guys and the kids who played in Sweden. People forget that the J20 league shut down really early. And then we had a lot of kids playing in the 3rd tier Hockey Etten league over there last season because it was the only place that they could play. And they weren't quite talented enough or quite far along enough in their development to play at Hockey Allsvenskan or the SHL. So the result was you had a lot of kids, 16, 17-year-old kids playing in a third-rung pro league that's very difficult to evaluate over there, or not playing at all when the J20 league shut down in the fall. So that piece of it in Sweden and in the OHL, it's real. The OHL in particular, that 16-year-old season is a transitional year. Yeah. Everybody in hockey and in scouting recognizes that first year where you go from minor hockey to the junior level, where you're playing against 20-year-olds, in some cases 21-year-olds, it's a big jump. You're trying to get yourself adjusted to living with a billet family, to living on your own, to living away from your family, to a new coach, to systems. I mean, minor hockey teams, credit to these AAA clubs, they really, a lot of them have sort of pro feels to them now, but there's still a big adjustment in terms of tactics, systems, deployment, special teams, all of that happens. So there's a long list of things that they get out of the way, a learning curve that they get out of the way in that 16-year-old season. And these kids just didn't have it. We had 2 rookie classes entering the OHL at the exact same time, 2 separate age groups who were coming in simultaneously. And it created sporadic hockey. I mean, there were, this is just anecdotal. I haven't actually crunched the numbers, but I would guess that there were more of those sort of infamous 9-6, 9-7 games that we all laugh about in the OHL this year than typical, just because everybody was sort of figuring it out. And coaches were figuring out who their good players were and all of that. So it was a tricky year. And a lot of the kids, you can see it in a lot of the OHLers this season, they really came on in the second half. You had David Goyette, you had these kids who really sort of came to life in the second half. And I think part of that was just what that sort of October to December stretch looked like before the Christmas break. It was just a challenge, and everybody was figuring each other out. So definitely something that's in the back of scouts' minds this year.
So before we move off the OHL, we've been doing prospect profiles and giving a 5-star review of how they'd fit with the Senators. And I have Owen Beck as a 4.5, 5-star guy for Ottawa. I think he's awesome. Could be as much of a second liner, but also a safe pick. What's your analysis on Owen Beck, what he brings?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, the Sens have their type, right? They want the hardworking, diligent 200-foot player who's maybe a little bit more athletically advanced. They like the kids who are sort of muscular and have beefed up already. And Beck checks all those boxes. He's a very athletic kid. He's a fabulous skater. He pushes tempo. He plays fast. He's involved. Just one of those kids who's always around it. And the Sens, for good reason, like those types of players. So yeah, definitely Owen feels like a Senators type pick. There are a lot of a lot of guys in this draft who do kind of feel like that. But I like Owen for the Sens as a potential sort of second round guy, that kind of range. He's got third line center kind of written all over him, right? And they want to build a team that's full of guys who play that style that he plays, and he that sort of cliche pro game, right? He plays a pro game, and they're drawn to that, no question.
Yeah, last time I gave a prospect 5 stars to go in 39th or 42nd, they took him at 10. So hopefully this is more of a second round pick for the Ottawa Senators there in Owen Beck. But everyone has their favorites every year. I know that in years past, you've been vocal about who you like, but what about this year? I mean, you're pretty high on Mathieu Savoie, I think, compared to most. Is he a favorite of yours in this draft?
Yeah, Matt definitely fits that bill. I think Matt belongs right in that top 5 conversation that has really solidified for other players. I mean, Logan Cooley, Juraj Slafkovsky, Shane Wright, I expect that those 3 are going to go in some order, 1, 2, 3. And then the 2D have really, really strengthened their cases over the course of this year. I think you'll see one of Simon Nemec and David Jiricek almost certainly go to the Seattle Kraken at number 4 after they took Matty Beniers a year ago. And then 5, you could see that whoever's left go. So that group of 5 players has really become the consensus for most scouts. I'm actually, right before we hopped on this call, I was doing my annual scout survey, and just this morning was my morning to just send out text to people and get responses back so I can start to fill my WordPress document here and get that ready for my editor. And just those 5 really do feel like, in talking to people, those 5 really do feel strong. But I think if there were a player who belongs in that group in this draft class, it is Savoie for me. I think Savoie is fabulous. He's got a motor. Frankly, I think that he could be a real option for the Sens. And I wrote this in my mock draft, but I think he deserves to be a real option for the Sens at 7. And I think he's a player that they will really like.
As someone who lives in Winnipeg, I'm all for it, and I've got my reservations with the other Winnipeg ice here available. So unless I'm waiting for Benson next year, I think Savoy would be a more solid pick.
Yeah, but he's got the skating, the skill. He's dynamic. He's one of the very best skaters in this draft. I spoke with James Patrick, their head coach, last week about him, and the first thing Patrick said is, first 3 steps, nobody in this draft is quicker from a standstill than Matt Savoy. So he's got that, the skating, the shooting, the sort of dynamic quality that his older brother Carter always has. He's got that. And then on top of that, he's got what Carter didn't have at the same age, which was that sort of dogged work ethic. Because it's almost ironic that his older brother was perceived to be this sort of lazy, one-dimensional, sort of cheating kind of player, and Savoy is the Energizer Bunny. He's finishing all of his checks. He's after it on the forecheck. They love him on the back check there. They used him on the penalty kill. So that piece of the puzzle is there too, and that's exciting. I think literally the only thing that Matt Savoy doesn't have is he's 5'9", 5'10", right? And those guys, especially if the team that's drafting him feels like he's going to be a winger instead of a center. Interestingly enough, Patrick was very insistent with me that he thinks he's going to be a center. But if a team wants him to be a winger, those sort of wingers, they tend to fall. They tend to be the guys, even if they're a top 10 talent, that go 11, 12, 13, right? So I think there's a chance that happens for Matt, especially after he suffered a shoulder injury at the end of the year and was kind of not playing his very best hockey in the playoffs, although he was banged up. So all of that is going to enter the conversation, but I think he's got a chance to be a star, and there aren't many players in this draft class that I feel that way about.
Yeah, and you mentioned Savoy could be a guy that the Sens target, and in your most recent mock draft, you had the Sens selecting Joakim Kemell at 7, which I've noticed has kind of been a trend. A lot of mock drafts do have Kemell going to the Sens at 7. What makes that such a good fit? Where you think, because in your mock draft, Savoy was still available for them to select, and you chose to give them Kemell instead.
Yeah, Joakim's another player who just feels like a Sens pick. There will be 3 players who look a lot alike who are available in that range. There's those 2, and then obviously Jonathan Lekarmäki, who was the star of U18 Worlds and the star of the trio of Djurgården's players that are all expected to go in the first round this year. Lekarmäki is a pure sort of sniper, and I think would actually be a great pick for the Sens, but just feels less like the kind of player they're drawn to. He's a little bit more one-dimensional. His game is all offense. Really,
yeah, the Sens don't really go for that guy, the elite sniper. They've passed on guys like that in the past.
Yeah, so Kemell and Savoy just feel like better fits that way. That doesn't mean they don't surprise me and go with a player like Lekarmäki, but Kemell has that quality, that sort of sniper quality. He's a shot threat. That's his bread and butter. That's his game. He likes to attack off the flank and take that sort of mid-range shot, and often beats goalies cleanly from mid-range, which is a very difficult thing to do. But on top of that, just plays with a little bit more, not scrappiness. I would call Savoy scrappy. I wouldn't necessarily call Kemell scrappy, but he plays engaged. He's involved. It may not be knocking someone over with a check like Savoy's capable of doing, but he's in the mix. He's on the forecheck. He's chasing down pucks. He stays in battles. He's a competitive kid. So I think he makes a lot of sense as a goal scoring winger who could play with Tim Stützle or a Josh Norris and sort of complement them in the future in the top 6 there as they get comfortable with those 2 guys at center. So I just think that starts to make a lot of sense for Ottawa as a player who's a little bit like the type they covet, but also maybe gives them something that they don't have in that sort of pure shooter.
100% agree with that. And then another guy who was off the board, but who was our pick for the Ottawa Senators in our first version of the mock draft was Cutter Gauthier. Does he not feel a little bit like Jake Sanderson in terms of the late rise? It felt like he was maybe around 20, and now, especially since it was announced that he's going to play center at Boston College, that he might be a guy that sneaks his way into that top 5, top 6 conversation.
Yes, and more that seems to be the persisting thread when I talk to folks. He feels more to me like a top 10 guy, and maybe this is a player that I look back on a couple of years from now and see, he's another member of that theme that I talked about where I didn't move him up fast enough. I think Cutter's a fabulous player, a deserving top 10 pick. But in saying that, I would struggle with him in that 5, 6, 7 range where he's starting to go in some of these mock drafts and where he's starting to be discussed by people like Dan Marr, the director of NHL Central Scouting at the Combine, said that he's one of the kids they considered closest to that consensus top 3, which means at least at NHL Central Scouting, they believe he's right there at 4, maybe. So there's a lot to like about Cutter. He's plays this sort of modern power forward game. They worked really hard. Adam Nightingale and their staff there worked really hard to have him hang on to pucks a little bit more this season, play to his skill set and play to his physicality and his size advantage and his strength. He's a very athletic kid. He performed extremely well in testing at the Combine, as a few kids on this year's program team did. So there's just, he's viewed as the complete package. He's 6'1", 6'2". You see him in real life. I've spoken with him over the course of this season a few times, and he looks like an NHL player, a lot like Tyler Boucher did and does, right? Just that sort of muscular physique, looks like a man already, and will continue to fill out. So that is there. And then he's got the scoring. He's developed more of the physicality. And he got to play with Logan Cooley. And I think part of it was Logan Cooley making him look really good. But part of it is there's something to be said for people who can play with a player like that and compliment them. And that's exactly what he did. He was the perfect foil for Cooley. And they just became a dynamic duo down the stretch, right into U18 Worlds. And he was a star. He really emerged as one of the top players on that team, which wasn't necessarily the case last year. He always played at the top of their lineup. But coming into this season was not perceived in the same sort of group as Isaac Howard or even a Rutger McGroarty. He was just sort of viewed as almost like a B or a B+ piece on that team rather than one of their A guys. And by year's end, I mean, there was no question he was an A guy. So that's a credit to him. He definitely feels like a guy that the Sens would consider at 7. But increasingly, I'm not sure he's going to be there.
Yeah, wild. Well, when you look at the Sens history, I mean, Jake Sanderson, Tyler Boucher, Tyler Clevin, Colin White, even trading for Josh Norris, Brady Tkachuk, all U.S. national team programs. And even through our top 64, they've been scattered throughout. Is this overall a strong year for the program?
Definitely. The hockey world was stunned when they lost to Sweden in the final there. This felt like one of the years where USA Hockey had such a good team that they were going to walk through that tournament. And they usually do walk through that tournament. Canada infamously basically created the Hlinka Gretzky Cup as a combat to U18 Worlds so that they could delegitimize U18 Worlds and tell the hockey world that U18 Worlds aren't the best on best just because their kids aren't allowed to participate. So it's the same reason you never see the U18 Worlds hosted in Canada. It's exclusively hosted in the US and in Europe. And it's because Hockey Canada doesn't want to give it that legitimacy. So, but this year in particular felt like one of those years, a lot like the Cole Caulfield, Alex Turcotte, Matt Boldy generation, Jack Hughes generation of players. It just felt like and that team coincidentally also lost at U18 Worlds, and everybody was shocked by, right? So
they were Shane Pinto away from winning that tournament.
Yes. Well, Shane Pinto would have been a Hlinka Gretzky Cup member for them.
Oh, true.
Yeah. So it's complicated with just in terms of how things are going to shape up, but it's a very good year. There are at least 6 or 7 forwards out of the national program who could go in the first round. And then Ryan Chesley, Lane Hudson, and Seamus Casey are three at least top 2 rounds defenders. So it's outside of not having a true goalie. I mean, Dylan Silverstein was hurt at U18 Worlds, and he's kind of the guy. He was kind of the guy there. But they've got, I mean, Rutger McGroarty, Logan Cooley, Cutter Gauthier, Jimmy Snuggerud. You go down the list. Frank Nazar, Isaac Howard. It's a very good group at forward in particular.
Can you expand on Rutger McGroarty as well? Because from what I'm seeing, he's another guy who just fits the Sens mold.
Yep, Rutger is awesome. Big fan. One of my favorite interviews, I was texting with one of the scouts that I was doing the survey with this year, that my favorite interviews this year were probably Rutger McGroarty and Vincenz Rower, who actually coincidentally plays for the Ottawa 67s. Okay. And Rutger just has that light in his eyes. He's just a joy to talk to. He's got sort of personality oozing out of him. And not in the same way that Jack Hughes and Trevor Zegras did at the program, where it kind of came off as showy. Yeah, showy and maybe a little cocky. Rucker's just it just seems like such a genuinely good kid, but he also just has that light and that sort of excitement about him. And teams, I think, are going to be very drawn to that. And he's another kid where you run into him a lot like Cutter Gauthier, and he is shredded, like he is built. And that's one of the big advantages that they have at the program. All of those kids do extremely well in the combine testing. And it's because they're in the gym with Brian Gallivan, who runs JBN, the gym that works with the program. They are in the gym 5-6 days a week all year long, and they do not stop. And Rucker he looks like a pro already. He's 6'1". He's not as tall as Cutter, but just absolutely built, plays that sort of honest 200-foot game, but also has a ton of skill, can really shoot the puck and score. The big concern with Rucker, and the reason he'll probably be more of a late teens rather than early teens, or maybe even a 20s pick rather than a teens pick, is because his skating isn't great. He'd be upfront. I'm sure he was transparent with that with teams at the combine. But his skating is it can look a little sluggish. But everything else about him as a kid and him as a player is high end. So another player that I think the Sens would have definitely been drawn to.
Who's the better skater, McGroarty or Geekie?
Rutger.
Okay. Yeah.
Connor is a better skater than I think he gets credit for. I think because Connor is so lanky and has so much room to fill out his frame yet, it can just kind of look like Bambi a little bit out there. But Connor and people who've coached, I have a story out today on Connor, but people who've coached Connor and worked with Connor and also worked with his brother Morgan, who obviously plays now for the Seattle Kraken, will tell you that Connor's a much better skater at this age than Morgan was. And Morgan's become an NHLer. So they'll also tell you he's more talented at this age than Morgan was. So I think Connor will be fine. But I would say that Rucker moves a little bit smoother out there than Geekie does.
Yeah, we're a big fan. We're big fans of Rucker McGroarty on this show. That's for sure. We liked profiling him. Now, I'm kind of the mind, Scott, for the Sens that they should target a forward with the 7th overall pick. There's much better options in that range for me, at least it seems that way. And then with the second round, there's so many good defenseman options. Like you mentioned a few of them from the program, Seamus Casey, Ryan Chesley. So which kind of defense prospects would you highlight the Sens to look at with that 39th overall pick? Because there's so many good ones that I really think that's where they should try to capitalize.
Well, I think there are a few D that are going to go in the 20s that they're just narrowly going to miss out on there that they probably would have liked. I could imagine them liking a Bichel, the Swiss kid who's 6'5" and plays a physical game, but can also sort of move the puck and hold his own with the puck on his stick kind of thing. Owen Pickering, really long, smooth skating WHL kid who blew teams away at the combine in his interviews with how personable he was. Pickering's a kid that I think they like, but those kids just feel like they're going to go in the 20s somewhere. So after that, it does get interesting. If Chesley is there in the second round, I think they'll like Ryan a lot. Ryan just screams Ottawa Senator. He plays a positional game. He's physical where he needs to be without chasing it. He's a very staunch defensive defender, but he's also got a really hard point shot and plays just a smooth head manning, sort of very intentional game with the puck, but he's not going to sort of dangle up ice and dance anybody. He just plays an aggressive, confident, poised style, and it just looks like when he's on the ice, he just looks like he's one of those players who's sort of in command of the game, knows where he needs to be. Everything just sort of happens the way it's supposed to happen, and I think teams really like him. And then on top of that, great kid, wonderful kid who just is sort of well-liked for his well-roundedness. So Chesley's a kid that I think will probably be a late first rounder, but if he's available on day 2, just feels like a Senator. Other than that, it's tricky. Some of the D that are going to be there, I don't imagine the Sens being super fond of. Like they don't strike me as a team that will love a Seamus Casey or a Lane Hudson. That doesn't mean they don't pick
Pilsy's just waiting. Pilsy's waiting for you to say his boy Ty Nelson here at some point.
Well, talk about a thick kid. Oh my God. That I have never met I'm not kidding.
Small but thick.
9 years of doing this, I have never met an 18-year-old kid who is built like Ty Nelson.
Yeah.
In another life, he'd be an Olympic bodybuilder. Like that kid is. And you can hear it when he's on the ice. Like his skates just sink into the ice. It's choppy and aggressive, and that kid is a unit.
And he's got some crazy hairstyles too. He definitely is not shy to try something different with his hair.
Yeah. So, and he looks like where he comes from. He's a very blue collar family. He's not a kid who came from a lot of money. It sort of carries himself in that way, covered in tattoos. Like he's just one of those sort of honest, hardworking. He's very physical because of his size. He's allowed to play a pretty physical game despite being 5'9", 5'10". And I think there are some teams that are really going to like that about him. Like he just walks into a room and you're like, holy shit, this kid is huge, right? So yeah, maybe Nelson. That's definitely his range. Nelson's going to be an early day 2 guy. I don't think he's going to be a first rounder.
I get some Joe Corvo vibes from him.
Yeah, maybe a little bit, but yeah, just to expand it. Yeah, I don't think Casey, Lane Hudson, even Luno, who could be there, Tristan Luno of the Gatineau Olympiques, doesn't strike me as the type for them. Very hardworking, honest kid, but maybe doesn't have the sort of confident physical game that they really desire from their defenders in Ottawa. Maybe a kid like Noah Warren sneaks into that conversation for them.
They spoke with him at the draft, right?
They posted on social media a picture of them, so they know at least they're chatting with them. But I mean, they probably talked to 200 kids, Pilsy. So.
I mean, Warren was one of the stories of this draft. He came in as a late rounder and really established himself. And part of that was as people came in to watch Tristan Luno, the former #1 pick into the QMJHL, and watch Antonin Barreau, another top pick into the QMJHL previously. Teams just found themselves liking Warren better than those two kids. And that speaks to his strength as an athlete, the way that he moves and skates, his length, another really big kid, sort of 6'4", 6'5". And it started to show some confidence with the puck and develop that game. But he is, I mean, I spoke with Louis Robitaille about him. Louis the head coach and general manager in Gatineau. I spoke with Louis Robitaille about him recently, and Louis just said, look, this kid knows what he is. He's not going to be a power play guy. He's going to be a third pairing, steady Eddie kind of player. And increasingly teams want that on their back end. I think the pendulum swung a little bit for a few years towards the Sam Girards and the Adam Foxes, and it does almost start to feel in conversations I'm having like teams just don't want to take the small defenseman. And teams want that St. Louis Blues blue line of a few years ago, right? Where everybody was just huge.
Yeah. Even Tampa now.
Tampa's got a big blue line.
I think you'll see the Maverick Lamoureux, the Lion Bishells, the Noah Warrens. Those kids are going to go early because of that. On the same token, if we did a redraft of last year's draft, who's the highest riser? It's Olen Zellweger, right? A 5'9" defender who is absolutely a first rounder and a do-over, and teams are just obsessed with him and think the world of him. So you can't write those kids off, but there's definitely a balancing act that teams are trying to strike with those kids. And I think there's a good chance that we're having the same conversation about Olen Zellweger next year that we're about Lane Hudson next year that we're having about Olen Zellweger right now. So it's a fine line.
Well, that's awesome. We're excited to see where he goes in our mock draft, which Scott's going to join us for. And I just got a couple more for you. Of course, you're already following him on Twitter, Scott C. Wheeler. Fantastic content at The Athletic with our best friend of the show, Ian Mendez, as well. So we always like to give shout outs to The Athletic. Oh, he's absolutely unreal. We feel bad, though. We got to finally shake his hand, meet him in person so he could officially become a real friend of the show, even though you never swung by Radical Road. So I'm still holding that against you. That to say,
and now I'm not an East Ender anymore. You're not an East Ender either.
I'm a West Coast, not West Coast. I'm a middle of the country. And actually, my final question has to do with just down the road, as I point here. Dylan James, are the Sens taking him at 39, or are they going to wait till the end of the second round?
It does feel like the Nodak rift is going to be present again.
We only have one left. Nodak doesn't rebuild, they reload, and we need to do the same thing with the prospects.
That's absolutely true. I think it's quite possible. Dylan had a great year and really impressed a lot of people. And again, just an honest, complete hockey player that the Sens typically like, right? He's that guy. So nothing that really thrills me about Dylan's game, but it's not hard to imagine him as a complimentary bottom six guy where if all goes well for him, he's a top player in college, and then he's an AHLer, and then someday he's a depth guy in the NHL, and maybe for 2 or 3 years in his career, he gets to shotgun on a top six line as kind of a third best player kind of thing. Like that's what you hope for him, kind of the Zach Hyman career path. Very different player than Hyman, but that's kind of what you imagine for a player like Dylan James. And I think that's what he would hope for himself. I don't think he sees himself as I'm going to be a star player in the NHL. He just thinks if I can be a good player at every level, I might give myself a chance kind of thing. So the Sens love those good players at every level who just work their way into the mix, right? And he feels like that. And obviously the Nodak connection is real. I'm sure the Sens would tell you it's not, but it is. There are just certain connections in these leagues with some of the teams. They definitely like what the program does there with their players, and for good reason. They've got a heck of a track record there.
It's just interesting. It's not only Nodak. They have their favorite spots. In 2020, they took 2 players from Brandon, Ridley Gregg, and Cole Reinhardt. They've taken 2 players from to pair Eels with Lassie Thompson and Roby Jarventi.
You're saving on travel costs, Ross.
Yeah, there you go. No doubt. What I was going to say, though, about Ian, I felt bad because when we met him at the game, he's like, I'll meet you guys in the concourse, end of the first period. Sens scored with 30 seconds left in the period, so he missed a goal. And then they scored a minute into the second. We were still chatting. So we caused him to miss 2 goals that game. So sorry about that, Ian. But yeah, Scott's got great work in the Athletics. So does Ian. Well worth the subscription. Corey Prodman as well, who's going to join us on the show soon. Pilsy, I think you wanted to ask about goalies because what the hell, man? We had so much fun last year talking about 2 first-rounders. Had to go way too far down the list.
Yeah, we're a goalie-friendly show, so we wanted to cover some goalies here. And as we mentioned, we did a top 64 prospect countdown ourselves. Not one single goalie. What, like, is there any explanation to this? Like, does that COVID gap year play a part here? Like, what's going on here, Scott?
That might be part of it. Goalies are typically slower to develop, and you lose that year, and it just has a more pronounced impact on them getting to that top level that's required to be a first or a second round pick as a goalie. But I also just think it's a down year. I think even if all things were equal last year, I don't think the kids who are at the top in this class would have worked their way up much higher. They just don't have that sort of star quality in this group. And yeah, I mean, if you guys know my list, but my top 100 for the very first time in doing this in 9 years, my top 100 didn't have a single goalie. First time.
Wow.
Very first time I didn't have a goalie on my list. So
you could throw Pilsy and I in at 101 if you want.
Yeah.
I'm ready.
Yeah. So it's, I mean, the two consensus guys, if you will, are Tyler Brennan and Topias Laine. Right. I like Brennan better. Brennan's a WHL kid who's got a decent track record and was better than his numbers this year and played on a bad team. So there's something there with Brennan. But Laine, I don't see it. Laine 6'5" and 233 pounds, which would make him the
already Leonard size.
The fourth heaviest goalie in the NHL this year. Only Stolars, Frederik Andersen, and Lainer were bigger than that this year. And that's at his age, he's going to get heavy. He's going to be 240 probably, right? So that does worry me. Some teams see that and they love that. They love that he's just massive, but I think he's going to struggle to move in the net as things progress here. And if he can't keep weight off, could become a real issue for him just playing at that weight long term. So probably wouldn't, I mean, there's appeal there, but probably wouldn't take him unless it's like a late round pick and he's going to be gone in the second or third round. The goalies I actually like in this draft class are the tiny guys. There are a few small goalies in this draft that I'm really excited about. Hugo Havelid out of Sweden, who won the Goaltender of the Year award at the J20 level there, and then also won the Goaltender of the Tournament award at U18s, was a star from start to finish, unflappable in the crease this year. Like, he just didn't get beat. And stole that game. Stole both of the final 2 games, made 40 plus saves in the semis against Finland, and then
sounds
did the
like
exact same
goalie
thing against Team USA. And increasingly, those guys are proving people wrong. I think for a while, everybody thought that the NHL goalies had to be 6'3", 6'4", 6'5", and now who are the kids who are coming up and surprising people and teams are getting good value out of? It's Devin Levi, who's 5'11"
I
and
mean, look
played
at
at
UC
Northeastern.
Saros
Yeah,
in
Devin
Nashville.
would have had my vote for the Hobie Baker this year. Dustin Wolf was a star in the WHL and arguably the best goalie in the AHL this year with Stockton. Another 5'11" soaking wet, right, kind of thing. And UC Saros, obviously. Those three kids are legit. And I think Hugo has a chance to do the same. And there are a few other names in this draft that I like that are smaller. Brett Brochu of the London Knights, another team that the Sens have not shied away from picking players from. Brett Brochu with the London Knights comes to mind. Havlid, I already mentioned. Sergei Ivanov, another small goalie who plays in Russia. I mean, the Russians are...
Sens haven't drafted out of Russia since 2005. Only Igor, and he was playing in Cape Breton.
Yeah. So, and if there's a year that they're not going to do it, it's going to be this year. So
yeah, Pills and I were talking about Miroshnichenko, and they're like, they haven't drafted out of Russia in 16 years. Now this is the year we got to do it.
Yeah, not going to happen. So but I would keep an eye on Hugo Havlid to be the goalie who maybe surprises people. He's not going to be the first goalie picked. He might be the third or fourth goalie picked, but he if I were to have a goalie on my list, Havlid would have been the guy.
Amazing. And his twin brother, we already profiled as a defenseman available. Yeah. Even their dad played for the Atlanta Thrashers. So they've got the bloodlines that we know the Sens covet as well. Awesome, Scott. We really, really appreciate this. Always fantastic insight as always. And glad that we can get on the raft together, swim under the bridge, and we'll have you back on soon as long as you're willing. So really appreciate this, man.
Yeah, would love to, guys. Cheers.
All right, thanks to Scott Wheeler for joining us from The Athletic. As always, you gotta check out his stuff at the Athletic. If you're not already subscribed there for Ian Mendes, great articles, you gotta check out Scott Wheeler's stuff also, especially with the draft coming up here. He's one of the top guys. He does so much research. And what I like really about Scott Wheeler too is he doesn't just kind of look at the numbers and the data. He does a lot of deep dives on these players' personal lives. Like a lot of, if you go through his rankings, there's players where he's interviewed them, their family members, coaching staff of their junior teams, etc., just to find out more about the person behind the hockey player too. And that adds a little more intrigue to where they're going to get drafted on the big day coming up here. It's this week. I can't believe it. It's finally here. The draft will be happening on July 7th. So stay tuned for that. We're going to have the Locked On NHL Network is going to be doing a draft show. I will be a part of that with Locked On Islanders, Gil Martin. So you're going to want to check that out when that comes. And Ross is away, but I will be doing Locked On Now reactions if the Sens make their pick at 7th overall. They still have the pick, so that's what we're going with for now. And part of me kind of hopes they keep the pick just selfishly because we've done so much work covering this draft. And if we do all that work and then the first day of the draft, the pick's traded and we don't get to dive in on a new prospect in day one, that'd be a little bit disappointing. But hey, I'm open for any news. Like, give us something here. And the Ottawa Senators, they did give us something. Was it Josh Norris extension? No. Was it some more rumors around the league? Yes, as Elliot Friedman once again kind of tied the Ottawa Senators to Claude Giroux. So fingers crossed that that's still going to happen. Claude Giroux still doing his research in Ottawa, maybe. I'm not sure. But there were some hirings that were much needed. A lot of Sens fans, we've been worried about, okay, they need to add to the front office. And what did they do? They let go of Pierre Maguire, and assistant general manager Peter McTavish ends up leaving the organization. So they've done more subtracting than they have addition, unfortunately. But now that changes as there are two new assistant general managers. One, we know very well, especially with draft season around the corner and in the thick of things, Trent Mann. Previously, the team's chief amateur scout has been promoted, and he's still going to continue to do his scouting duties, which I'm relieved of because I feel like that's where he is best. And he's done scouting for the Ottawa Senators for quite some time now. And in Trent Mann, we trust, as the Sens have kind of coined that term. And he's going to be adding player development roles as well. And a familiar name, Bowness, but not Rick Bowness. Ryan Bowness, the former director of professional scouting for the Pittsburgh Penguins and son of Rick Bowness, was hired as assistant general manager. Now, he's mostly going to be looking at contracts, and he's going to be the general manager of the Belleville Senators. So it's interesting that the Senators decided to promote from within with Trent Mann. That's probably a good move. I think a lot of people were expecting something similar like that to happen. And they go with someone classic Sens, the son of someone they know very closely in Ryan Bowness as the assistant general manager, mostly looking after the Belleville Senators. So it's good to get some news in that front. Was that number 1 on Pierre Dorian's checklist? No. Number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5 even? Probably not. But hey, you got to get things done. So now they've got Dylan Gambrell signed. Thank God for that. And they've got 2 new assistant general managers. So at least things have been bolstered up a little bit. We're still going to be waiting on news, as it seems like lots of other teams are getting busy. Tampa with the big Nick Paul extension, trading Ryan McDonough. Teams are trying to get their stuff in order for the offseason. The Ottawa Senators need to do the same. Hope you enjoyed our chat with Scott Wheeler today. That's all I've got for today's show. For Brandon Pillar, for Ross Levitan out in Croatia, thanks for listening to the Locked On Senators podcast, your team every day.